My name is Mark, and last night was the longest night of my life. I work the night shift at a lonely gas station off the interstate, surrounded by nothing but dark woods and silence. The nearest town is 20 miles away, and it's rare for anyone to come by after midnight. Most of the time, it's just me and the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. Last night, I was about halfway through my shift when I noticed the gas pump's flickering light. It blinked on and off like a signal. This wasn't unusual. Old pumps like ours had their quirks, but I felt a shiver run down my spine, and I couldn't shake it. Just as I was convincing myself it was nothing, I heard a car approaching. The faint headlights cut through the darkness as the car pulled into the lot. It was a beat-up, old sedan with a dull, dusty coat of blue paint. It looked like it had been driven through more years than it should have survived. The engine stopped, but no one got out. I waited a moment, wondering if they needed help. Finally, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, and I immediately felt uneasy. He was tall and thin, almost too thin, with sunken eyes and skin that looked stretched tight over his bones. His clothes were old and worn, and he had an odd smile that didn't seem quite right. "Hey there," he said, his voice soft and strange, like he hadn't spoken in a long time. "Evenin'," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "Need some gas?" The man tilted his head slightly. "Yes, but not just gas." I didn't know what he meant, but his words left a sour feeling in my stomach. I watched as he moved to the pump, studying it like it was some foreign machine. He looked back at me and said, "Mind filling it up? I've got other things to take care of." Normally, we don't pump gas for customers unless they're disabled, but something about him made me agree. I stepped out of the station's booth and walked over to the pump. As I started filling up his tank, I noticed something odd. The fuel gauge needle didn't move. It stayed fixed at empty, no matter how much I pumped. I looked back at the man, but he was gone. That's when I felt it, a chill creeping up my spine, like someone was watching me. I turned around and saw him standing by the door of the gas station, just staring at me with that strange, tight smile. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice carrying over the empty lot. "The pump's not. It's not working right," I said, my voice shaky. "The tank's still showing in." He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound that didn't seem human. "Oh, it's working just fine," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "You just don't see what's filling up." I backed away from the pump, feeling my skin crawl. What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the side of the building, where the shadows were thickest, and disappeared into the dark. I hurried back to the safety of the booth, locking the door behind me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that he was just some strange guy passing through, but then I looked at the security monitor and froze. The camera feed showed the man standing in the shadows, watching me. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light from the station. He wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. I decided to call the police, but when I picked up the phone, there was no dial tone. I hung up and tried again, but the line was dead. My cell phone had no service either, which was odd since I usually got a decent signal here. For the next hour, I stayed inside, watching the monitors. The man didn't move. He just stood there, half hidden in the dark. Every now and then, he would shift, just a little, and I'd catch a glimpse of his eerie smile. Around 3 a.m., a second car pulled up. I felt a wave of relief, thinking maybe these people could help. It was a couple, a young man and woman who looked like they'd been driving all night. They got out, stretching, and the man went to the pump while the woman headed toward the... I unlocked the door just enough to talk to her. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, noticing my pale face and nervous look. "There's a man. He's I don't know. Something's wrong with him. He's been here for hours, just watching men." She frowned, looking around. "I don't see anyone." I glanced at the monitor again, but the feed was empty. The man was gone. I felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Had he left? Or was he hiding? "Maybe he took off," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "Maybe," she said, giving me a concerned look. "You sure you're okay?" I nodded, trying to shake off the fear. Yeah, I'm fine." They filled up their tank and left, leaving me alone again. The night seemed to stretch on forever, each second dragging out longer than the last. I kept checking the cameras, half expecting to see him standing there again, but the lot remained empty. Just when I thought the worst was over, I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the back of the station. It was soft at first, almost like an animal, but it grew louder, sharper, until it sounded like nails scraping against. I grabbed the flashlight and hesitated by the door, debating whether I should check it out. The scratching continued, relentless and unnerving. I told myself it was probably nothing, just a raccoon or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I stepped outside, shining the light around the corner. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept toward the back of the building, the scratching growing louder with each step. When I finally reached the corner, I stopped, holding my breath. The light revealed nothing. The noise had stopped, and the alley behind the station was empty. I let out a shaky breath, turning to head back inside. But as I turned, I saw him standing by the door. He was grinning, that same unnatural smile, his eyes shining in the darkness. I stumbled back, almost dropping the flashlight. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out. His smile widened, revealing teeth that were far too sharp, far too many. "I told you, I'm here for more than just gas." I turned and ran, my heart pounding as I darted back to the booth, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, breathing heavily, my mind racing. He just stood outside, staring through the glass, his eyes never leaving me. Then he began to knock, slow and rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Each knock sent a shiver down my spine. I pressed myself against the far wall, as far from the door as I could. "Let me in," he whispered, his voice muffled through the glass. "It's cold out here." "No," I whispered back, barely able to speak. "Go away." The knocking stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. I dared to hope that he had given up, that he would leave. But then, slowly, he leaned against the glass, his face pressing against it, his eyes boring into mine. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. "Not until I get what I came for." I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my keys, opened the door a crack, and bolted for my car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine, praying it wouldn't. As I backed out of the lot, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. His eyes glowed in the darkness, following me until I was out of sight. I drove for miles, not stopping until I reached the next town. When I finally pulled over, I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I don't know who or what that man was, but I knew one thing for certain: I'd never work another night shift at that gas station again. My name is Tom, and I work at a small gas station in the middle of nowhere. It's the kind of place that only sees traffic from travelers passing through, usually in a hurry to get to the next town. I work the night shift because no one else wants it. Nights here are quiet, lonely, and sometimes creepy, but the pay is good enough and it helps me cover my bills. One night, around 1 a.m., I was halfway through my shift. I was sitting behind the counter, flipping through a magazine, trying to stay awake. The only sounds were the hum of the lights and the occasional creak from the old wooden floor. Outside, the wind was picking up, making the tall pine trees surrounding the station sway and whisper. Then, I heard a car pull up. The lights flashed across the windows, and I felt a little relieved. A customer would be a good distraction. The car, an old black sedan, looked like it had seen better days. It came to a stop near the gas pump, but no one got out. I waited for a minute, watching through the window, but the car just sat there, idling quietly. Finally, the driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He looked about my age, maybe a little older, wearing a long, dark coat. There was something off about him, though. His movements were stiff, almost unnatural, and when he looked up at me, his eyes seemed empty, like he was there but not really. He walked to the counter, his footsteps heavy, and gave me a slight nod. "Evening," I said, forcing a friendly smile. "Need gas," he replied in a low voice, barely looking at me. "Sure thing. Pump's ready to go. Just swipe your card when you're ready." He nodded again and walked slowly back to the pump, moving like each step took effort. I watched him, feeling a strange chill crawl up my spine. Something about him was just wrong. As he started pumping gas, I heard a sound from the back of the store. It was a faint rustling, like someone was moving around in the storeroom. I figured it was just a mouse or maybe the wind shaking something loose. Still, it made me uneasy, so I decided to go check it out. Leaving the counter, I walked to the back, peeking into the dim storeroom. I turned on the light, but everything looked normal. Shelves filled with spare supplies, cleaning products, and some old equipment. I didn't see anything out of place, so I shrugged it off and went back to the counter. When I got back, The man was standing right at the window, staring at me through the glass. His face was pressed against it, his eyes wide and unblinking. I jumped, not expecting him to be so close. "Everything all right?" I asked, my voice shaking a bit. He didn't answer. Instead, he just kept staring, his eyes fixed on me like he was trying to see right through me. I felt my stomach twist. The way he looked at me wasn't normal. It was intense, almost hungry. Finally, he stepped back from the glass, his face going back to that blank expression. Without a word, he got back in his car, started the engine, and drove off into the night. I watched the taillights fade into the distance, trying to shake off the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I sat back down, my heart still racing. I told myself it was just a weird encounter, that he was just some strange guy passing through. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him into the station. The air felt heavy, like a storm was about. Then the lights flickered. For a moment, the station was plunged into darkness, and I could only hear the hum of the machines and the wind outside. When the lights came back on, I saw a figure standing by the door. I gasped, my heart leaping into my throat. It was the man in the coat. But he hadn't just walked back to the station. He was there, standing inside the station, dripping wet even though there hadn't been any rain. His face was pale, his eyes wide and fixed on me again. How did you get back in here?" I stammered, backing up against the counter. He didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head to the side, like he was studying me, and took a step forward. I reached under the counter for the baseball bat we kept for emergencies. "Look, man, you need to leave," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He stopped, his eyes flickering with something that almost looked like recognition. But then, slowly, he started to fade. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but when I opened my eyes, he was gone. The room was empty. I looked around, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Had he really been there? Or was I just tired, my mind playing tricks on me? Just as I started to calm down, the sound came back. The same scratching sound I'd heard earlier, but louder now, like it was right outside the station. I turned toward the door, and there, outside, I saw the black sedan again. It was parked in the same spot, the engine running, but the man wasn't inside. I stared at the car, my mind reeling, wondering how it had come back when I'd just seen it drive away. Then, slowly, I saw something move in the back seat, a shadow, shifting and growing, like something was crawling out of the darkness. It was hard to make out, but as it took shape, I saw eyes staring back at me. They were hollow, empty, like two black holes in a face that wasn't really there. I stumbled back, feeling my body go cold. Whatever was in that car wasn't human. It wasn't the man, it was something else, something dark and hungry. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and when they came back on, the car was gone. The lot was empty, and everything was silent. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I told myself it was over, that whatever had happened was just a bad dream or a trick of the mind. But then, I noticed something on the counter. It was wet, a small puddle of water, and next to it was a single footprint. My heart pounded as I stared at it, realizing that whatever had been here was real. I had been driving all night, my eyes heavy and the road stretching endlessly ahead. The radio had stopped working hours ago, and now there was nothing but the hum of the engine to keep me company. I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dark fields and patches of trees, with no sign of civilization in sight. My gas tank was running low, and I had no choice but to keep an eye out for the nearest gas station. It felt like I hadn't seen a single one for miles. Finally, after what felt like forever, I spotted a sign on the side of the road. It was old and rusty, but it clearly read, "Gas station, next exit." Relieved, I took the exit, expecting a quick stop before I'd be on my way. But as I drove down the narrow road, the station wasn't immediately visible. The further I went, the more the road twisted, leading me deeper into darkness. I started wondering if the sign had been wrong, or maybe I'd missed a turn. Just as I thought of turning back, I saw it, a single light in the distance. The gas station looked like it had been there for decades. There were two pumps under a flickering yellow light and a small building with a faded sign that said, "Last stop gas." The place looked abandoned, but I had no other choice. I pulled up to the pump, turned off the engine, and stepped down. The air was cold, and an unsettling silence surrounded me. The station looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. Dust and grime covered the windows, and weeds sprouted through cracks in the concrete. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just an old gas station. But then, I saw the figure in the window. At first, I thought I was seeing things. There was a shadowy shape inside the building, barely visible through the grimy glass. My heartbeat quickened, and I took a step back. But then I saw the figure move, a man standing behind the counter. His face was mostly in shadow, but I could tell he was watching. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound casual. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet night. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring. I started to feel uneasy, but I couldn't leave without gas. Taking a deep breath, I walked over to the door of the building and pushed it open. A bell above the door chimed as I entered. The inside of the gas station was as old and worn as the outside, with shelves stocked with dusty snacks and expired cans of soda. The man behind the counter didn't say anything, didn't move. He just watched me with cold, expressionless eyes. I forced a smile and cleared my throat. Just filling up. My tank's..." The man didn't reply. He just stood there, his gaze piercing and uncomfortable. Up close, I could see his features more clearly. He was tall, with pale skin and dark sunken eyes. His clothes looked like they belonged to another era, an old button-up shirt and I shifted awkwardly, waiting for him to say something, but he remained silent. Finally, I mumbled, "Right, I'll just fill up then." I grabbed a dusty gas can from the counter, paid him, and walked back to the pump. As I filled the tank, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced back at the building and saw the man standing at the window again, staring out at me. His face was blank, almost lifeless, and it sent a chill down my spine. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the pump instead. When I finished, I got back into my car as quickly as I could. But when I turned the key, the engine sputtered and died. I tried again, but it wouldn't start. Panic started to set in as I realized I was stranded at this eerie gas station with no way out. I glanced back at the building and saw the man still watching me, his face expressionless. Desperation took over, and I got out of the car and walked back to the building. Maybe he could help me jumpstart the car or let me use a phone to call. As I approached the door, the bell chimed again, but the man was gone. The counter was empty. I looked around, hoping to find someone else, but the place was silent and empty. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. The footsteps continued, slow and steady, coming closer and closer. My heart pounded as I backed away, my eyes scanning the empty store. The footsteps stopped, and a voice whispered from behind me, soft and "Don't." I spun around, but the store was still empty. The door slammed shut, and the lights flickered. My breathing quickened as I realized I was trapped inside the gas station with whatever this was. I ran to the door, pulling at it, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard the footsteps again, echoing through the empty aisles. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the shadowy corners of the store. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows on the walls. And then, in one of those shadows, I saw a figure. It was the man from the counter, but now his face was twisted and distorted, a grotesque grin stretching across his pale face. His eyes were dark, empty pits, and he moved slowly toward me, his gaze locked onto mine. I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I searched for a way out. I spotted a back door behind the counter and ran for it, throwing it open and rushing outside. The cold night air hit me, and I kept running, not daring to look back. As I reached the edge of the gas station property, I turned around to see if he was following me. But the gas station was empty. The lights were off, and there was no sign of the man. It was as if the whole place had disappeared into the night. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My car was still parked by the pump, but I couldn't bring myself to go back. I turned and started walking down the road, hoping to find help, or at least put some distance between myself and that cursed gas station. I walked for hours, the darkness pressing in around me. But every time I looked back, I could see a faint light in the distance. The gas station, still there, waiting for me to return. I never did.